From Dragon 360, this is Digital Banter, a podcast focused on modern marketing tactics and driving real business results. And now, here are your hosts.
You're recording this?
So, tell us more about your hair.
Well, I had never lost a hair in my life. Then I had COVID. And about a week after I finally recovered, I was in the shower and I went like this, and like clumps of hair started coming out of my head. And it didn't stop. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, this is like, what is going on? And I actually, there was an ad on you get all those ads on Instagram, Hims. And Keeps was actually the one that got me first. So I started taking the oral finasteride, which is Propecia, for those old enough to remember the brand name of that. And it actually helps. It stopped the hair from falling out of my head. So
that's what happens when you turn 40. I mean, you could have had something else. It could have been a COVID symptom.
I'm telling you, it was COVID. Because not only me, one of my other friends too, same fucking thing. So I mean, it was strange. It's a strange thing. And when you actually start researching hair loss, it's actually a circulation problem and a blood problem that causes that to begin with. Not only DHT, but also circulation and blood. That's what Rogaine and that's what finasteride does. Is it opens up the blood vessels in your head.
It's not like a blood pressure thing though. Like
no, not necessarily.
Improved cardio and eating. I mean,
I don't know. It's
being healthy helps you not age.
Which is what COVID was doing to a bunch of people. Was a blood problem for men, especially stroke, right? So. Anyway.
And for those tuning in today for our episode of Digital Banter, you've now just gotten a pharmaceutical scientific lesson in hair loss and hair growth from Anthony Daronzio, who is joining us on today's episode. So yeah, James wanted us to be a little bit more casual with our intros, and that's as casual as you can get, right?
Yeah. So we got the first question for Andy. And Andy, you're a former athlete, right? You used to work out and play football, and I imagine you've done a bench press here and there. So Anthony and I got into this huge debate about a week ago about the length of your limbs and how it affects your ability to lift weights. AKA, it's easier for a short guy like Anthony to get deeper in a squat and also bench press more weight because he has less distance to go and less leverage. What do you think on that? Do you think it's easier for a short guy to bench than a tall guy?
I feel like upper body is a little different than lower body. Squats are still a squat. Upper body, absolutely. Length of limbs plays a huge part between bench or curls or whatever. Definitely.
See, this is the thing for many years that I've always heard guys that have no ability to bench press. They have no strength. That always come in. They first start training and they're like, oh, you could bench press 315 because you have short little stumpy limbs. No, I could bench press 315 because I train hard and I have mass behind here. I'm mass moves mass. This is what I was talking about with James is mass moves mass, right? That is how work happens, is that the weight of the object behind it allows you to create more energy to then move the mass, right? Does not necessarily matter how big your limbs are. And my perfect example of this is Brian Shaw, who is a monster. He's 6'8", he's 400 pounds. I mean, or maybe more than that. He might be more than 400 pounds. He doesn't have any time. He's the strongest man in the world. So and James seems to think that there's some inflection point where you get to a point where it doesn't matter. And that point that doesn't matter is mass. I bet you Brian Shaw, 6'8", 190 pounds, or however skinny he would be if he didn't lift, would not be able to do that, right? The mass is what makes him do that. So
we're talking about...
Hang on. James, what's that quote you say? Oh, people only care about attribution when something's not going right. Is the same hold true here? People only care about limb length when they can't bench press for the shit?
Exactly.
I mean, to an extent, yes. I mean, for what it's worth, Anthony does warm up with my max. But at the same time, he's also about 12 inches closer to the deadlift bar on the ground, because if you think about having a pair of 45-pound plates, let's just keep it simple, right? They're only a certain distance off of the ground. You're talking about the difference between a sumo squat or sumo deadlift, where you're just slightly not bending your knees anymore, to a traditional deadlift for a tall person versus a short person.
Try to deadlift 700, sumo or conventional. You can't do it. You still have to train and be strong to get there.
Yeah, but I bet I could do more sumo than I can conventional.
Yeah, but could you? I mean, like,
yes, that's one is easier than the other, but
I don't think so. I think that if you don't train sumo squat, you cannot just. I've been doing deadlifting conventional for 25 years. If I go and just do sumo squat, I'm going to pull my groin. There's no way. I am not going to be able to. I'm not going to be able to sumo pull up my deadlift. It's just not going to happen. So I think and the weight differential would be extreme. So.
All right. So clearly Anthony's better at lifting weights than I am. So let's talk about something that I'm a little bit better at than him.
One last point.
What?
Lifters, they base their meat on weight. They don't base their meat on arm distance or leg space. Right. So if you're 220, you're benching with guys that are 220. That's all. That's my final point.
The science is a little bit different. Follow the science, Anthony. Follow the science.
Follow the science. Is right. There you go.
Coming from the guy who nets a fish like he's tomahawking.
All right. So since we're talking about lifts, let's talk about lifting the results of organic marketing, since that's why we had Anthony come back on, right?
Yeah.
He is the organic guy.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big setting the stage here point and conversation is with all of the turmoil and layoffs and cost efficiencies happening throughout the landscape of tech, but also the economy over the last 12 months or more recently. Obviously, there's a greater focus on making your marketing investment in organic, whether that's SEO, content, everything else that goes into that, much more strong, right, Anthony? I mean, what have you seen? You have a diverse experience that goes between D2C, tech brands, but also pharma, everything in between. So, I mean, you have a good kind of view of all of that.
Yeah, I definitely I see the way it's been kind of going is everything's kind of, so everything was in its own lane a few years ago. You had SEO in its own lane, you had SEM, everything was in its own view, right? Attribution, probably not so much important because you had this tremendous organization that was just constantly growing. They didn't have, I don't think that, in any organization, it was just like, let's hire more people. And then they had no way to like link it all back together into one attribution model, right? And say, now I think earned is becoming a little bit more important as far as, being able to show results, right? And being able to say this is long, organic, sustained growth, right? Whereas, God forbid, you lose your display person, you lose your programmatic person, and that drops off out of nowhere. You still have this sustained growth from organic coming in. Everything's kind of been rolling up into one now, all of growth as a whole, which is new for me. I mean, we've all been doing this for, 15 plus years, right? So, I mean, I've never heard of growth until recently, right? Like the growth org, performance and growth and everything like that. And then it's like, what is growth? But growth is just, it's digital marketing, like good digital marketing, right? So,
Yeah, the introduction of all these new job titles is so like revenue marketing. That's probably like my favorite one. That is like, it's like, oh, hey, we've been doing all this marketing for a long time, and let's see if we can tie it back to revenue. And it's like, okay, well, that's what you should have been doing the whole time in
exactly.
one way, shape, or form. But to your point, like, I do think it's an attribution thing, right? Because there used to be teams that had separate goals. You had your brand team who was given like I'll call fuzzy metrics. You had the performance marketing team. I guess that's even a new title, but who's responsible for performance? SEO was the team that was focused on content. SEO content had more of a long-term vision for the company. And now they're in this position where there was honestly nobody at the helm who was balancing short-term quick wins and long-term growth.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of these like growth titles, the revenue marketing, I mean, that's kind of more like a marketing plus sales role, which always worries.
Right? Like in a big org, growth is working with sales. They're optimizing their funnels. You know what I mean? Growth is the one that's gonna, they're working with ABM, they're working with, every little aspect of it. And like you say, in the no attribution upwards, there needed to be something created, right? And whether you call it a digital marketing director or VP or head of growth or whatever you want to call it, right? There needed to be something there, that someone that to conduct everything and say like, okay, let's put max effort into this, and no one to hit the brakes and the gas on every different channel, But especially with the downsizing, we've seen a lot of generalists kind of win in these situations, right? Because these specialists that were in this lane, you're going to probably wind up being the first to go and first to get laid off, unfortunately. And then, the generalists are kind of being able to take on a little bit of everything,
I mean, there's two sides to that too, right? Like I heard somebody say, this was a couple of weeks ago, just on LinkedIn, they were talking about how they structure their team is more so based on people rather than roles in their marketing team, because of, if you have a good marketer, they're going to be able to adapt. I mean, you and I were talking about some of the hybrid roles between like search and SEO that are coming out. And there's a ton of, and I think what's coming out of this is that people are being forced to adapt to do things, because when you are in a specialist role, like a specialist role is a small piece of the strategy versus a generalist role can control, run the strategy, adapt, do multiple different things, where, I do think that there's a lot more value in it. The problem is like, do you have the jack of all trades, master of none problem? So I don't know, I guess my question, like with all, you've seen these departments get restructured at this point, you've seen these new roles come in. Do you think that things are moving in the right direction? Like, what do you think are the pros and cons of the direction things have been going?
I think the right direction is yet to come, right? I think it is a better direction, right? To lump all these efforts together. I'm an SEO guy, but I also think that organic growth should lead a lot of these efforts in order to, one, make you get the most bang for your buck, regardless of the type of marketing you're doing, right? It all comes down to what everybody's doing online, right? I can't just throw out paid search and not know how my users are searching. I can't put a digital, display network out without knowing how my users are surfing the internet. Otherwise, I'm going to be targeting people that have no interest in what I'm doing, right? So I think from an organic perspective, you need someone at least that has that background to lead the role, right? To be the leader in that and say like, okay, this is our audience, right? This is who we're talking to, and this is how we talk to them at every step of the way, right? So it's your awareness content. We talk to them a certain way. We talk to them a certain way on consideration and decision. And then don't forget about retention, lifetime value too, as well, right? You have to talk to those people a certain way. So if you want to build this community, and that is long-term growth, right? Like that's just the only way you can get from point A to point B. And I think right now, a lot of companies that don't, because we just saw, Startup Central is pretty much what's happening now. It's like the .com bubble, but 2023. Yeah. So, you got all these startups that don't have that brand awareness and everything like that. So they're dumping money into paid media, but not having any kind of strategy as far as like, they don't even know who their audience is yet. I mean, like they know what they're making as far as the software, but they have no idea how to target these people, how to create this long-term revenue, or a long-term relationship with your users, and I think we're not there yet as far as like an org structure. I think, obviously it evolves over time, right? Like you were saying, we were saying, you have your SEO in your own lane, everything's in your own lane, no attribution really coming up to a whole. Now we do have that attribution, but is it being done right is really the way it's got to look at it.
To your point, so I also believe that, let me put it this way, a good, diverse SEO person makes a better marketing leader than somebody who comes from a more segmented background, probably honestly better than paid. Because think about all the things that fall under SEO. You have the website technical stuff. Usually your SEO person is also the same person you live this life, like analytics person, content person, technical, like has a little bit of a development coding background. There's a lot more I mean, you still like in comparison to paid, like you still have to do all the same audience research. You have to like your goal is to serve the user, serve the customer.
Yeah.
Where, you know, in this transition, it also has a much more long-term vision versus paid, which I think fits nicely in that grow at all costs model that has now, I'll say, burned tech.
Yeah, I would say it has burned tech too. I think that is definitely the key quote of this conversation.
Yeah, but I think it depends on the individual. Like, obviously, I'm a paid guy from my beginnings, and like, obviously, I'm the CEO now of a full service agency. I'm not just a paid agency. But like at the same time, think about you brought up a good point, James, about like the specialist versus generalist. I mean, if you go back to 10 years ago, think about how many generalists were doing search, right? Search. And now you had that progression where you had everybody being specialized, whether it's enterprise or SMBs. And now you're going back to, hey, we got to cut headcount, and you have now 3 roles that fall under you, and we're right back to where we were 10 years ago because the unsustainable growth kind of hit that bubble. Yeah. But like it really comes back to the individual. So a good point here is think about all the conversations that we've had over the years between all 3 of us about rankings, right? Oh, we got to be number 1. We got to be top 3. Do whatever you got to do to get up there. Like that's worse than paid. Like you are just focused on one single outcome rather than the true long-term sustainable growth. And that's why I'm saying it comes back to the individual and their ability to look at the forest beyond the trees.
Yes, exactly.
That's on the organic side, attribution was ignored until recently. I don't say ignored. Attribution was rankings and traffic, not leads, revenue.
How do you really differentiate that from brand? You know what I mean? If you have a brand marketing, how do you rankings and traffic could come from brand efforts? You have no idea. You know, so I mean, like you could just because direct and searching it all ties in together, right? I mean, so you know,
well, that's why we created the phrase demand gen.
Correct.
Because
everything together.
Yeah.
Where they don't have to.
Because we were able to effectively now measure and talk about how we measure brand and content-based initiatives.
Yeah. I think that's I know we've talked about this before, James, but demand gen is like the full guy.
It is. It's funny. And I've talked to a lot of demand gen people recently who, I mean, quite frankly, that was a very heavy position that was laid off recently because I think it was the scapegoat for revenue marketing. I don't know, like the scapegoat. You didn't hit your targets. We need to do a demand gen guy. Yeah. It's not the product's fault. It's the demand gen.
Yes, the demand gen guy. Yeah. I mean, and another thing, you know, like when we're talking about specialty and stuff like that, like I see a lot of positions now that are like, you know, I think it gets a little bit, you know, we went back to this generalist kind of, you know, growth kind of thing. And then it spins out into, when you look at a position, it's like 8+ years in B2B SaaS. And like, how? We haven't had that much startup growth in you know, B2B SaaS stuff. I mean, there was only 8 years ago. I could probably count on 2 hands how much SaaS software is out there that was, you know, in a competing manner or that is still around even, you know, like it gets a little ridiculous sometimes, you know, but you know, you can't have that granularity yet.
Yeah.
I think a good SEO or a good marketer in general, it does not matter. If it's B2C, it's B2B, it doesn't matter. They're going to know what they have to do to get in there and do it, right? Like, I mean, it's if you're a good marketer, you know how to tell a story, right? And when you were saying like, you know, it does depend on the individual, I think you need to have that creative mind, right, to be a good marketer. I think what I wind up always seeing is someone that's a paid search junkie is kind of just sitting there numbers and blah, 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 and then maybe they don't have that creative, that they're not left brained, you know, so they don't have that ability to turn that into, you know, a story or anything like that, right? So I think that's important. Yeah, you're right about that.
Google's taken all of that away from us at this point too.
Yeah.
So Anthony, you brought something interesting. You kind of name dropped ABM into a point that you made before, and where I was hoping that we could take this conversation is more towards like enterprise organic growth and strategies. And as we all know, ABM is one of those kind of pieces of the puzzle as it applies to enterprise organizations, more so than SMBs.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious to get your take on how does organic contribute to ABM efforts? Like, where does it come into play?
I think it's the same. It should be completely overlapped. All right. So if you're looking at, let's say you're a SaaS company and you're selling a software, who is coming to use your software, right? That, okay, maybe the manager comes in, looks at it, and they're the ones that are like, okay, because they're the ones that are going to need this in their everyday life, right? And director is usually sign off. You don't need to be targeting CMOs. You don't need to be targeting CEOs unless it's a particularly small company. And then maybe you do that, but there's really limited information on there. You want the pain points, right? And now I got to find those people in my ABM, right? And I want to deliver the same pain points that I'm delivering for organic search to say like, oh, I'm stuck in this, we can help kind of stuff, right? So I want to deliver that same message to the same people at the same time across all of my stuff, right? Across my entire multi-channel efforts, but ABM in particular, because there's really, you're forcing yourself into their lives, right? And with ABM, right? That's a forced method of marketing. So you want to make sure that they notice you, and they're not going to notice you unless you're talking their language. So, and that's where organic comes into play, understanding their language, right? Understanding what they're looking for, what are their pain points, how they're looking for it, when they're looking for it, and then weaving that into your ABM model, So I see a lot of, people that are just going there, they dump and they have lists and they just go and that's what a lot of these positions nowadays, that's what it looks like it is anyway. It's like, for ABM, and it's lumped into growth too as well, of course, but, and then me and James talked about this with demand gen side of things too as well. Even partly, belongs to ABM too as well, but, open this up and let anybody go in there, let's stop, with trying to sell every time in a way. Like you're forcing yourself into someone's life. Sign up for more emails from us, So, I think that's kind of crappy.
So I got a question. So a big part with ABM in particular from the paid media side is that you're like when you talked about it as segmenting between influencers and decision makers and serving content based on the pain points of each of those, which I think is a piece of ABM for sure. The other piece is like the level of personalization that goes into it where, down to, I'm going to build a landing page. This is more of a paid thing. I don't see how this could fit in an organic at all. But like, I'm saying building a landing page for a specific company. I want to build a landing page for APM, like for IBM. Like that's something we could do on the paid side, but probably something you would never do on the organic side. But what a lot of companies do is they'll do like industry pages or like, I don't know. I feel like they're almost like clickbait. I don't even know how I would describe it, but they're doing more of the stories. They're doing industry pages trying to fit their ABM strategy based on like their target industries, even though on those industry pages, they're literally giving the same exact content, changing out the industry and hoping that it ranks. So if I'm looking for project management software for civil engineering versus, I don't know, medical something, right? Like, is there value in that? Is that a waste of time? Is that too much? Is it duplicate content? I'm curious what your thoughts on that are.
If I was to push that out to the public, that's just unnecessary. I would, like you said, I would probably, and that's where, Andy was saying, a bigger mind needs to come into play here. Is like, we need to balance this in a sense, right? Like, that's got to be all paid. That's got to be all landing page. It's an orphan page or whatever it is, or it sits on our HubSpot and however we use it. But personalization, I would agree. That is key. That's big stuff, right? That's going to tug. You guys always talk about it. I see it on all your podcasts too, as well as the emotion, right? And a buy. That's going to tug a little bit more at your heartstrings. But it's also a little creepy. Like, how do they know that I work at IBM? And I that they know, but it's just like it's still a little too much sometimes, maybe for some people. But no, I do think that's super important, right? Like you're really identifying with that person if you can craft it correctly. But then it comes back to what are the pain points of people at IBM? So then it comes back to that creative mindset again, and kind of circles back, and you gotta understand, the user again.
Yeah, I mean, James, so you bring up paid and landing pages, but at the same time, to your point, Anthony, I mean, there's plenty of tech out there that personalizes a website's experience based off of IPs. I mean, you were at one of them for a time. I mean, based off of what you've seen, like, there's a level of creepiness, obviously. There's a level of generality that has to go into it because you only can talk so specifically as the intelligence and data that is provided to you. But like, is there a true lift that you see from personalized web pages that, are based off of somebody's IP and expected or assumed company versus those that are not, from an organic perspective?
I haven't seen it. If there is, it's not significant enough that people are talking about it. From my perspective, look, that might be a big hit for someone else. You know what I mean? Like, but from what I've seen so far, I haven't seen a huge lift as far as that kind of level of personalization goes. I think also there's probably a lot of other factors in there, Andy, like that are you gating everything, and what does success look like in that respect? If it's just a matter of getting your brand out there and getting them used to you and trying to develop a community, and then maybe it's more successful like that. But if it's to sell something right then and there, that's just not happening. I don't, even with personalization.
So let's dive into that a little bit. So, how would you compare and contrast an organic strategy for an enterprise business, whatever, we'll say 200 million ARR plus. We'll just throw that out there as a cursory kind of segment, versus more of an SMB, couple million, maybe a startup, but let's say a couple million. So at least they're somewhat established and mature. Like, how do you approach those differently? What are the challenges, the hurdles that you have to overcome, but also, just generally speaking, like, how do you approach those differently from a strategic perspective?
Yeah, well, yeah. So what you're going to have on, I think, where it comes down to with enterprise is at that level, you're expected to be bringing in a huge number of everything, right? So I think it's more of, little puppet master kind of stuff at an enterprise level, right? Like you're fine tuning this, you're fine tuning that, and you're at least keeping, if not incrementing, revenue, right? So, but also you have if you are the huge enterprise that isn't making 200 million, whatever, you have brand behind you, right? Like, so you have that trust already. You already have that brand trust that if you're an online retailer, you have brand trust. If you're, there's a lot of depth behind there that you just don't see, at a smaller business, right? So like a smaller business, you're trying to get all those things that the enterprise has, and that's just not possible. So you have to start focusing on your, like I said, brand is big. You can carry that brand a lot, and I think that's, James, we were talking about before with someone jumping in on a big company and then just riding the brand and saying they've had success, right? So, but you still have to show your success in an enterprise, but it's a lot easier, right? You got that nice, that's already humming. You just got to fix it and fine tune it and move it on so it keeps humming up, and up. I think building is the harder part, right? From a small business perspective, obviously, the way I would handle that, like I said before, is, we're focusing around brand stories, and then really kind of tying that back to the user and how the brand affects their life at an enterprise level. Down at the SMB level, I need to really fine tune where my unbranded efforts are going, right? Because I need to be ranking in niche areas. I need to be presented at all levels in niche areas of a search, right? And that's a lot harder. You don't have that brand behind you. You don't have that trust behind you. You don't have that domain authority. You don't have any authority in search. And it's a lot harder to build unbranded content from scratch, or a small business that does not have, or they're looking to break into a new sector, of search or market. And it's tough. It is probably the hardest part. Creating good content, though. I think the biggest thing is not just content in general, just a good site experience. Is you really, it all comes down to that. Is a good user journey. Is looking and understanding your user base and how they're looking for what you are giving them, right? How they look around it. What else is related to that you're missing too, as well? Like, it's just a bigger story that just doesn't always come into play with a lot of marketers. You always got to look at the big picture, especially for a small business. That's so tough. I go on LinkedIn, I look at some of these guys that are part of huge companies, SEOs are like, oh, look at these results we have. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay. You have a $500 million a year business that you're running. Like, go tell that to the guy down the block who's got, maybe not even $1 million a year in revenue. Show him your SEO results, So
Anthony, you and I talked about this with like CRO all the time too. Right. So
maximizing that conversion.
But like in a large organization, the amount that you have to do to make a significant difference is significantly different than what it is in an SMB. In an SMB, you're so focused on building, like you need to pump out content and see what sticks almost. Right. And a large enterprise brand, we talk about like the Amazon like button color test type stuff. Right. I mean, it's so silly, but like you hear all these studies on like these minor SEO changes that Amazon did that made them an extra $1 billion. And it's like, oh, they rewrote the meta description for something that's like really kind of minor and insignificant, but it's making them a crap ton of money versus like if you did, a huge technical audit on a startup, you're probably going to find a lot more issues and it's going to have way less of an impact.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I think that when you start talking about CROs, like, I think your efforts are diverted a little, right? Like a lot on an SMB, right? You're not really thinking about like, am I optimizing my lead funnel is to the fullest extent? I'm more worried about bringing people in the door and letting people know that I'm alive. Right. And then, you're not really thinking about getting them converting or keeping a retention, a lifetime value. What do you offer past, extension? So
the other thing with enterprise is all of the challenges of the business model that comes into play from acquisitions, new product development, all the competing interests of, you have 5 different product groups and product marketers that are competing for the same customer because you built out your portfolio, your suite of solutions that cater to the same persona, to the same ICP, just in different ways. Yeah. I mean, how do you talk about audit, James, right? Like, Anthony, how do you go about addressing those competing interests when you have so many different stakeholders and competing interests within an enterprise organization?
I think that's where your agency experience comes in and being very diplomatic and very salesy, right? So, no, seriously, it helps. I'm not even joking. I was at, my history, I was at GSK. And GSK, when I went into that role, it was a global search role, right? So you're this center of excellence within GSK pretty much, and you got to try to get buy-in from all these brands and all these local markets, right? So and now you're talking about like it's something like there where you got competing things, right? Like Voltaren, which is, gel for pain. And then I got Advil, which are pills for pain, but they're both pain, right? So they're both targeting for this spot. That's when it really starts getting nichey, and you can do that at the enterprise level though, right? Like you can really get a little nichey at the extra, and like, you're targeting out this search. You could almost craft the search, with the brand, right? Like gel related back, like that kind of stuff. If you're using that in your brand marketing, then you're creating the search for that, so you can create a niche. I think that's what the power of enterprise is, as opposed to like a small business. Like I can't really create the demand for something at a small business where you can create the demand. You can literally say, this is going to be how people are going to look for my product.
I think it's like easier is the other thing.
Okay. Right? So hang on. So here's a challenging question then for you. So James and I talk about search as being a demand capture channel. And so is everybody else out there, the loud voices in the room, as Drew Smith would call them. We all know who those loud voices are, not Anthony necessarily, but he's got that Bronx. He's got to articulate. You got to articulate it. Anyway, so we look at search as a demand capture channel. So Anthony, how does SEO generate demand, or how does organic generate demand? If you want to look at it through that lens instead of just SEO,
it doesn't.
There we go. All right, podcast over. See ya.
care. Well, all right. It can be used for demand gen efforts, right? It can for demand efforts, right? So let me change that up. I'm not creating, the demand is coming from the person sitting behind the computer searching, right? Like they're looking for a particular product. I cannot sell them I have a title and a description in search. How am I selling them on to go with my brand? Like I'm not saying, or creating search space around this. From an unbranded standpoint, yes, I can create a search space and I can try to monopolize this unbranded market. But I'm not creating demand for it, really. I mean, I'm not. They're searching for something, and I'm just filling that demand in a sense, right? But on the other hand, now if I'm creating really good stuff and I'm sharing that out on organic social, and I'm sharing it out on all of our efforts, and that's just going everywhere. And then I also have my company using an app like Sociable or something like that, where they're sharing out all my good content. Then I'm creating demand, right? But from a strictly search perspective, I'm not creating any demand.
Yeah, I mean, the only kind of like you could make a case for like answer boxes and things like that, where there's still demand initiative because there's a question being asked, but it's at least at a higher level than truly looking for the bottom of the funnel answer, so to speak.
Right. And yeah, but there's a case to be made that like I don't necessarily want that answer box because I don't want to give you the full answer that you're not going to finish going to my website. Like there's also a case to be made for that. I've had that come up in conversations before when I'm like, listen, we got 2,000 answer boxes. Oh yeah, that's great. Well, are you getting any increased traffic from that? Or it's tough. It's tough to determine that, and it's tough to say, does it make an impact, or does it make a negative? Some cases, depending on how good the answer they're showing you, you're going to have a negative. They're just not going to click through. You gave them their answer. They're done. You got to craft those answers to make sure that they want to continue looking about this subject. So that's a different,
Answer boxes are going to disappear anyways.
They might. I don't think so. I think it's cool. It's more going to be a more complete search. People also ask, is never going to go away. I don't think so.
Here he comes with his Chat GPT bullshit again. Let's not.
I was going to go into Bard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but all you're going to wind up seeing is the same shit from that we see now answered by Chat GPT. It's just it's not going to be.
But to your point, like it's like there was no value in those answer boxes anyways. Brand. I'll call it brand because you're making yourself the brand authority on the answer to that question. But to your point, are they going to visit your website? Are they deep enough in the funnel to be capturing something that has some level of intent? No.
Well, you're really summing what I said up there into generalizing that. I said there can be a case made for that, and I've seen some of that. It doesn't mean that it happens all the time, right? But but you're going to wind up seeing the same stuff. If let's say they start integrating GPT into or Bard or whatever it is into search, right? Which I don't think they will because they have their own version of that for search, which is what you see every day. Is something that's probably a little bit smarter than Bard, I would say. Bard is basically, or ChatGPT are basically autocompletes, right? That's what they are. So I mean, it's just an intelligent autocomplete. It's narrow focused AI, right? It's not it's not, this thing is not going to become sentient. You know what I mean? It just doesn't have that ability, but it's narrow focused AI in the sense that it's like it understands language and vernacular and all that stuff.
But it's intelligent, right?
In a sense.
Yeah. So if you search Chat GPT and or look at the answer box answer for how the length of your limbs affects your bench press, they both actually say that
on the screen right now.
They both actually say that it does matter.
Because they're pulling that information from guys' websites that say, that are really weak, that are like, the short guys can't, they bench more than us. That's like there's probably like groups and coalitions for guys with long limbs that can't bench and that blame short people.
So
I don't know what ChatGPT would push out as an answer to how to net a fish. However, Google says just get the net in the water, then wait. The next number one rule is to always net the fish head.
Let's just yes. So let's talk about.
So it doesn't say tomahawk.
No.
See if you can chop the fish in half with the net.
James must have had he had a monster pike on, and he's been looking for it. He comes to my lake all the time. And he's looking for this monster pike all the time, right? And I'm like, yeah, we're gonna get you one finally. I wind up pulling them out all the time, and I'll send him pictures, and I'm like, hey, monster pike. So we're getting him one. He finally got one on, man, and it's a beast. And this guy's got I have a pontoon boat, so he's got the rod hanging over the boat, and he's lifting the fish out of the water. This is a 10-pound plus fish. You're not going to flip this in the boat, you know what I mean? So he's got this thing out of the water. I'm trying to get underneath the fish to get the net in, and he had weak line on there, and he had a little swivel, and that shit snapped, and that's the end of the story. Had nothing to do with my netting.
Well, he's also not going to flip it in the boat because he's got long limbs and he can't bench as much as you. So he's got no strength. Yeah, he's got no strength
to get over.
I actually have more leverage in that scenario because I have a better.
Now it's going to play to his advantage, right? Now you can't pick and choose when you want to, say that long limbs are.
What do they say? Well, the longer the rod, the more leverage you have, so you get better hook sets with a longer rod.
You may be a better hook set, but try pulling that thing in with a longer rod. If I had a 9-foot rod, how am I going to lift that fish in? You can't, right? If I had a shorter rod, it's thicker, it's shorter, and I'd be able to easily pick that thing out of the water, right? Anyway, let's not.
What I wanted to talk about as we come back to on-topic conversations is measurement and defining success. Because I want to keep going down the enterprise versus SMB route. When I ask this question too, is SMBs, to your point, they're focused on growth. It's a lot easier to measure because you are at a smaller level in revenue. You can see more incremental impact from efforts compared to enterprise. But Anthony, how do you go about measuring results from enterprise when it shit's all over the place, number one, but also the balancing act of driving revenue, as we let off this conversation about, versus the long-term brand results and then reporting that out? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, well, that's where a little bit of politics come into play, right? And really, I think you got to start partnering with your data people. You got to be best friends with those guys, and see what you can get out of it, right? See if you are at enterprise, and I mean, you've experienced this before, then, and I'm talking to the wind here, but, but if at an enterprise level, you really gotta make sure that you're being super tight with your data partners, right? So make sure that you get everything you can into one spot. That's the most important thing first, right? Is to get everything you can into one spot. Now you bring in your organic stuff, and now you can attribute better, right? I think too, at a higher level, it's easier to report at a higher level in enterprise than it is necessarily at an SMB. Like you said, you're very cognizant of this is an organic lead. It came in and it turned into this and it went into that, right? So that, whereas I think the volume is more important at an enterprise level, right? I think a great metric to use, and this can be applied to both, actually, I would say both enterprise, is organic value. And organic value is just I would call it real estate, your real estate value, right? So that's the amount of traffic that you're getting from organic, what it would cost to bring in that same amount of traffic if you're using paid methods, right? So that, it's easy to calculate on your own, but there is software that does that for you. So I'm not going to name drop software, but there is stuff that does that for you, probably at a much quicker rate than you could possibly ever do it on your own. But so that you're taking that organic value and you're showing, I mean, it's pretty simple. Like, my house is worth this. Is my real estate going up? Is my real estate going down? Right. And I think that's good organic growth. And it's a good number to show. It's a lot harder to attribute an enterprise, right? You're just having so much going on. There is so much that, you couldn't possibly say that this search originated all on its own by itself, right? So I think it's a better way to attribute at an enterprise level to say, this is what we're worth. And this is something to show a C-level, we're executive director, right? And this is what we're worth right now on the internet, right? And so this is our life, and organic is worth this. And then we track that and we see, are we going up? That means I'm ranking for new stuff. I'm starting to show more for more real estate, which is good. But I can't necessarily say at an enterprise that I'm the one driving that, right? So it might be a brand effort that opens up a new lane of search for us, but I want to make sure that I'm showing up for that new lane of search, right? So, so that is a good overall metric from that perspective, I would say. But it's also good at SMB too, right? Like, okay, are we growing? Is the organic growth happening? What's going on? So, but again, a lot easier, like you said, to say like, this is an organic session. It turned into this, and we know because we don't have as much brand marketing going on. We don't have as much as direct efforts, right? Than to say that this turned into this.
So how do you tie those organic efforts into revenue? If like revenue is the end all be all metric that I agree with, like as a business, obviously real dollars pay real bills. Yeah, and warm fuzzy feelings of, oh yeah, we engaged and empathize with our customers. Like those are real initiatives that move the needle, but they don't pay the bills. How do you tie organic efforts into revenue then? Because it is like, it's not you're setting UTMs, right? You're not, software attribution is extremely flawed when it comes to organic, in terms of not measuring it. And any qualitative insights are not going to, you're going to get, oh, I found you on Google. Okay, well, how on Google? Obviously, you didn't just go and search and randomly, you popped up. It was deliberate.
Yeah. You searched for something. Yeah. Right. What was the act? Why did you do that? The intent behind that. You can kind of, you only get so much information on keywords level stuff, right? On search levels, you're missing so much, even by Google, even if you're using Search Console. It's hard to say like, okay, we could kind of gauge intent behind this. No, you can't. Let's not, I don't care if Rand Fishkin goes in there and talks about intent and stuff. You can't gauge intent. You are not in that person's head, right? So at the end of the story, I don't care how psychological you get. But what you can do is say, okay, well, how much brand efforts are we doing? How are you, what could possibly be also contributing to this organic drive, right? And then it's just a real attribution model from yourself that you have to say like, okay, let's say, all right, we give that, if it's a branded search or branded something, okay, we only take, 55% of that or something like that. You come up with a metric that makes sense for your organization based on their other efforts too, as well. And, you could also include your direct, we do know organic leads turn into this. If you're using a HubSpot, you're using a Salesforce, again, this is probably a bigger organization that has that kind of money to use that kind of software, to say like, okay, this organic lead turned into this, and now we know how much money we got at him for a lifetime, right? So, I think there needs to be an attribution model that needs to be set and worked in cooperation with all your channels, and then I think that ties back to our original topic of growth, right? Maybe that's the growth director who decides that, I know what I could contribute from an organic standpoint, but maybe it's the growth director who's like, okay, let's, we're going to give you 60% attribution. You're going to get this, you're going to get that, so whatever it is.
Well, you mentioned like customer journey being a big part of it too. And I think the thing that's important to remember with any part of attribution is that you are just one point in the customer journey.
Yeah.
SEO is heavily focused. It's a demand capture activity. Mm-hmm. When you are testing, building content around new keywords, new things, whether it's volume that was created from the brand or just something that exists in your category out there. Like you can only capture a certain amount of demand. The piece that I would look for is like, is the content that's being created, is this a touch point in the customer journey? The more times that it's a touch point in the customer journey, the more value that it's bringing to the table. I mean, If anybody ever asked how much revenue are we getting from SEO, like the answer is actually, I don't want to say zero because that's not accurate, but it's about how much demand it captures and whether or not it was a touch point, not like SEO did not force that person to do that search, right? And I think that's where you get into the psychology of it.
Yeah. So the other thing though, too, that I'll jump on there is the majority of SEO is a tactic and strategy focus on capturing demand for net new revenue. And when we talk about the buyer journey, there's the whole aspect of customer marketing and lifecycle marketing, support articles, resources, FAQs. If those aren't optimized to get the customer the answer they need quickest and fastest, now you're not just talking about, revenue creation, you're talking about revenue loss.
Yes.
So if SEO is $0 in terms of revenue, in reality, how much are you losing if you're not investing in SEO when so many brands, especially at this moment in time, are focused on customer and lifecycle marketing?
Yeah. I mean, that's huge. Like, the fact that you say that, a few years ago, I was interviewing at a massive company, and it was for a director of SEO position. I will remain nameless as far as what it was, but I think I did sign an NDA. I don't know, but I can't remember. So that was the position was for, and I thought this was a super novel idea, literally optimizing their support section. So literally optimizing their support section, because it was so big and there was so much demand that we wanted to make sure that, when people are searching for this software specific, stuff, that their support section is the first to show up. Right. There was also some nuance too, because we want them to, you would want them to buy support levels and stuff like that. But yeah, it was, I thought that was the most novel idea. And I thought that was such a hit. I was like, wow, that's what you need, like that LTV is going through the roof with that, I think.
That's for sure.
Well, here's the other idea that you just spurred in my head that, is something that anybody should consider. If you have those sections, if you have those resources, those support articles, etc., think about how people buy from you. Customers are your greatest resource as far as referrals and word of mouth marketing.
Yeah.
If in reality, how often are they actually going to your main site once they become customers? I don't know, just to get to the about section, just to get to contact, just as a gateway to get to those resource libraries. So how can you craft the user experience of those resource sections, those about articles, et cetera, to not just address the question of your customers, but use as an opportunity to send them into other areas of the site and give them the opportunity to showcase why they're a customer of yours, right?
Yeah.
How can you create a positive experience in a UX way that allows them to spread the good word, spread the wealth of knowledge, not just through addressing their question, but through other forms of content that creates that word of mouth snowball effect.
Yeah. I've seen that. I've seen that in models too, in user journey models, where it's not only it's retention, but there's a fifth stage called advocacy, where you're turning them into this, you're turning them into your salespeople in a sense, right? Making sure that you are putting content out there for advocacy, right? So I think that's a whole nother section too, as well, is to increase LTV and really talking about that community. A lot of brands go, we want to build a community. Well, then you got to build a community, man. You got to make sure that you got to make sure that you cover every aspect of your community, not just bring people in, but you want to give them life afterwards too, as well. So.
Yep. So as we bring today's episode to a close, Anthony, I want to give you the opportunity to give 2 or 3 action items, takeaways, recommendations for someone that might be in an enterprise business as it relates to their SEO strategies and opportunities, especially this year.
First, I would say make friends with everybody in an enterprise level. Make friends with everyone. I mean, I know it starts getting into that politicky kind of stuff going, when you're in an enterprise, and it happens, right? There's going to be people that want to glom up all the glory, and there's going to be people that are just workhorse and they never speak up, but are great workers too as well. Make partners with both of those people, right? You want to make sure that you're involved with everyone first. That's your first thing. Otherwise, you will not succeed. You will not get any of your strategies done. You will not get anything off the ground. That is the first thing. And it's difficult because not everybody has that personality, but you got to try your best, right? You really do. And the next thing I would say is create a plan of even if it's a 30, 60, 90, right? And this is not only is this a plan for you to start doing your stuff, but it's a gauge on how fast your organization responds in SEO, right? So, it's a test, right? So it's a test for you to understand how all of these moving parts work together. So, something simple. Maybe it's just a couple new pieces of content. Do they have to go through compliance? Do they have to go through here? Do they have to go through there? So this allows you to say, okay, how much could I possibly get done in this 90-day period? I could set out with 10 things, but in reality, I'm only getting 2 things done. And then again, then you work on the relationships again after that. Okay, well, I could have gotten 4 or 5 more items off this list done and made these, if had I known who this person was and this person was and this person was. So then you kind of get that open a little bit more. So that's the first thing I would say that you should probably do in enterprise SEO, right? It's really people management. A lot of your normal SEO efforts that you would go into a company, oh, we're going to do titles, descriptions, that's probably already been done. You could certainly perform an audit and you could check that yourself, but that you could take out the window. And the next, and I think the next thing is like your foundation, your technical foundation of your website, especially in SEO, in enterprise level, where your high traffic website that's coming in. I was telling this to James before, we were just talking about this, is like, if the foundation of your house is loose, you can put all the windows, all the doors, all the, you have fancy rooms, granite countertops. It's going to collapse, right? Because your foundation's crap. So from a technical perspective, that is going to be your biggest wins if you can get them over the line, because it's going to allow you to have better SEO on the front end, right? So making sure your IA is correct, you're coming in, you're not over indexable, right? Like huge, massive websites. Make sure you're only listing maybe 2 filters as opposed to each filter being its own page, and you're having, billions of pages on your website. Let's trim that down, right? Let's see where we can really just focus on general topics and stuff. So looking at that, looking at what's crawlable, what's not, looking at the structure, making sure that your infrastructure is okay as far as your CDN, your, all your backend's technical stuff, right? We don't have to get into detail about that, but that's your biggest key right there, right? That's your biggest one, is that to make sure that is the way, that is the way you start your efforts, is by on a technical foundation. And then the last one is, I would say, 3 things. If it hasn't been done yet, start looking at a real proper user journey for your people, right? If it has, usually, your company might have an ICP of ideal customer profile of someone that's been, that we know is a usual software. Start digging into that. And this is going to inform all of your on-page efforts anywhere, ever, right? So you're going to look at that, and I mean, could it not only inform your stuff, you could wind up informing every other channel and looking like a rock star, right, while you do it. So look at this ICP, all right, and look at it and say, or build it, one or the other, right? You're going to have to get that data and really look at it yourself and start building relational profiles, and then start thinking about how these people are looking for your stuff, or where in their life can you insert yourself and say, oh, look, we have an answer for you. We have a solution for you, right? Or, that's really what any business is a solution to your problem, right? You're overweight, you go to a gym, it's just a solution to your problem. Find how these people are looking around your stuff, right? Not only for your stuff, but for things that may be related to your stuff too, as well. Try to get their whole user sphere, right? And where they overlap and everything like that, right? And everything in between. Just get as much data as possible on those users. And that's where you want it. Now, I want you to imagine yourself coming in as a brand new person and going through your website and saying, if I was brand new, what's going to get me to sign up, right? And then crafting all that content, all those ideas that you just made around those people, making sure that content is in front of them at any given time. Maybe it's a related article piece at the bottom of your page that says, read this next. But after having just read that, that's like, oh, yeah, definitely. And then boom, 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 and you're turning them into a lead. If you could do it in a session, fantastic. If you can't, you want to make sure that they're able to pick that up at any other level of search down the road, right? So that would be the most important thing from a revenue, from a content, from an actual growth perspective. So yeah, those are my 3 points. Those are my 3 takeaways.
You out of breath?
Yeah.
Yes.
Might want to bench some more. Might want to do some more squats, man.
No, that's not going to help with
build up that cardio at the same time.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Walk uphill.
Yeah.
So. All right. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us today. Any final words?
No. I don't think we need any final words, right? We just
well, considering now that we're in spring, if I start seeing halves of fishes just float along the water, I know who to call, because slicing them in half.
I just wanted to show James that mass moves weight, not necessarily your long arms. That would be my final words.
Mass moves marketing. There we go. Mic drop. We're all done with today's episode. Like, subscribe, connect with Anthony Daronzio on LinkedIn, or reach out to James and I to connect with us on social. Catch you next time, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thanks for listening to Digital Banter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.